Hello, and with me today, I am very happy to welcome Ambassador Evans. It's his first interview this year and a very special interview during this time of lockdown. Ambassador, thank you so much for joining us on RTL today.
Thank you for having me.
Now, first of all, I would actually like to talk about your beautiful wife, Linda, because I know during this period you haven't been able to be together. Is she okay?
I think she's doing fine. It's been a very difficult. This is actually the longest time that we have not seen each other since we've been married for decades. And it was just, I'm sure like many others, it just caught us all up by surprise. We had gone home for the holidays at the end of the year last year in 2019, and we sold our home and moved into a condominium. And while we were in that process, I was called back to Luxembourg. And then, of course, COVID-19 hit. And I've been here since. She's been there since. So we're still working toward trying to find a date whenever I can get back to the U.S. and spend time. But I think that's been literally the hardest part. I mean, I think being here and making the decisions that I have to make, doing the jobs that we have to do, they're all challenging, they're all difficult in these times, but that's just makes it a little bit tougher. But we talk to each other multiple times a day, so it's not quite as the same as being able to reach out and hold her hand, but it's good to be able to hear her voice. Thank you for.
Do you know when you'll be able to see her actually again?
We don't know, because we're waiting on the latest from the EU and Schengen with regard to the expiration of the border controls. Based on what we currently know, it looks like those will expire on June 15, and that will then allow people from the US, such as myself, returning to come back to Europe. Obviously, as a diplomat, I probably could, work it, but we have so many important things that we're working on. While COVID-19 in itself presents a whole host of challenges, not just for Luxembourg, but for the entire world, there are many other challenges that didn't stop. So the work of our embassy didn't stop when COVID-19 came along. We're still working very hard on space. We're still working very hard with regard to our NATO commitments. We're still working very hard on a number of other issues that are important to Luxembourg. And the Grand Duchy's been a great partner. And we've, as you know, and if you haven't seen it, I'll send you the number of accomplishments that we have gotten done in just a short period has astonished many people, but it's because we look for those things that we have in common, and we work on them, and we work hard on them, and it's made a big difference. We have a document, it's called the Snapshot, which gives you a rolling routine, but it literally reflects the number of signings where the Luxembourg government and the US government signed mutual commitments to each other. And these commitments range from defense-related topics to space-related topics to health-related topics to cybersecurity. It's a number of things. And so while 98% of what we see on the news every day is COVID-19, as we fight this war as mightily as we can, the fact is that there are many other things that go on at the embassy that we've had to continue and have continued as we've made our way through 2020.
Now, you've lived in Luxembourg here, I believe, since June 2018, and it's your first posting as an ambassador. How are you finding it?
Well, I love the country. I mean, as you may remember from my very first interview, Luxembourg was my pick. It was where I wanted to come. I was fortunate enough to get to come here. We've had an incredible 2 years. I mean, if you had told me that we would get to celebrate the 50th anniversary of man landing on the moon with Buzz Aldrin coming to Luxembourg, I would not have been able to believe it. or that we would have celebrated the expansion of commerce into space by having United States Secretary of Commerce Wilbur Ross come to Luxembourg and visit with then Deputy Prime Minister Schneider to sign a mutual memorandum of understanding on space. If you had said that the Speaker of our Congress would come to Luxembourg to celebrate with us the 75th anniversary of the Battle of the Bulge, along with the Secretary of Defense and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and a whole host of senators and congressmen and congresswomen, I just wouldn't have believed it. But all of that happened. There are many who say that there weren't that many in Washington before I came that knew that much about Luxembourg, but that now everyone in Washington, D.C. knows about Luxembourg. And that's because they've come here and been treated well, and we've gotten a lot of work done. And because Deputy Prime Minister Francois Bausch, Jill Zweig, and many others, Minister Cox, all went to Washington, D.C. We visited the Pentagon. We visited with 9 United States senators in a one-on-one setting. We signed 2 different cooperation agreements. So we've got a lot of work done, very short period of time, while dealing with the COVID-19 crisis.
Now, I believe you were chosen by President Trump to come here. When did you first meet President Trump?
Oh, that would have been a pretty good while ago. I mean, in connection with Luxembourg, I mean, it was that there, I was pretty happy being a lawyer. The firm that I was with has an office here in Luxembourg, so it wasn't that Luxembourg was a place that I was unfamiliar with. But I knew the importance of Luxembourg. I knew its importance in the EU. I knew its importance in the world financial markets. I knew its importance in terms of being an honest broker between the superpowers, the Russia, China, and the US. So I was well aware of it. And the skill sets that I had well suited, what the country excels at, which is space, financial transactions, and being a participant on the geopolitical landscape of the planet itself. And so the two worked well together, and it was a great chance to get to come.
And so you were able to talk about Luxembourg to the Republican Party, to President Trump, before he was president perhaps, about its pivotal role within Europe.
Well, my first and most important thing was to make sure that people understood first what a great people Luxembourgers are, how that they don't forget, how they are generational, how they carry values and inspiration in their hearts and in their souls, and it doesn't go away in a wisp, and how that is so important for a country like ours who has sacrificed so much. In fact, as you know, this coming Saturday, we will celebrate Memorial Day out at the Luxembourg American Cemetery, and it'll be a great opportunity. While we can't open it to the public because of the COVID-19 restrictions, we will stream it, and it will be available to anyone who wants to participate by just hopping on our website and joining us. And we have a very special treat this time, which I think you're going to appreciate. Everybody has heard of General Patton at our cemetery, but very few people have heard of one woman who's buried there, who was a nurse.
Ambassador,
and so we will.
I'm so sorry.
Sure.
I'm so sorry to pause you. It's only because it's frozen again. It's coming back now. So you're talking about. So I'll just rephrase the question again. Ambassador, I think you were talking about Memorial Day when we lost contact with you. So yes, obviously. Oh, Craig?
Yes?
Yeah, no, we're just trying to figure out if we move this around a little bit, will it move the strength up?
Yes,
Yeah.
I was actually thinking if you can connect it to a phone connection, that often helps.
Yeah. I mean, we have full Wi-Fi, so
Uh,
Yeah.
Oh, we'll try again. We'll try again.
We'll
Okay.
try it again.
So, yeah, so
We'll
I think,
get,
yeah,
so, trust me, it won't. It takes nothing to wind me back up and start me again. So what I was saying was, for the U.S., the Luxembourg people are people of great passion, and they carry this passion and they carry the memories for generations. And one of a great illustration is that this weekend, as we were talking about several times, as that we have Memorial Day that we will celebrate on Saturday. Memorial Days actually will be Monday the 25th. We celebrate it on Saturday so that more people can participate. Now, they can't come to the cemetery this year because of the COVID-19 restrictions. So we're going to stream a very special ceremony that we will have, from the cemetery itself. And there's one woman buried at Luxembourg American Cemetery. She was a nurse, and given the importance of nurses in this frontline war against COVID, we're going to honor her. We're going to have the nurse who is responsible for caring for the embassy in Brussels and the embassy here come. And I don't want to spoil it all, but basically we'll have a nurse come talk about a nurse that was buried there who was on the front line, both of them serving on the front line. So that everybody always hears about General Patton, but now they're going to get to hear about another hero who lost her life and lost her life, in connection with her service in the armed services. But I thought it was a fitting tribute to say, wars come, but the people on the front line still sacrifice much to be there. And so these 5,000 at our cemetery sacrificed to defend us against the Nazis. Those defending us in this war are nurses and doctors and healthcare providers. And what better way to pay that tribute than to have a nurse come talk about a nurse 75 years ago who also lost her life defending freedom.
There's a beautiful symmetry to that. And of course, we will put links to this live stream on the bottom of this piece. We've already written about it on RTL today. And you will be there in person alongside this nurse.
That's correct.
Now, I just wanted to talk about, well, let's keep it chemical. Let's keep it, I just wondered what you thought about President Trump taking hydroxychloroquine.
Well, listen, but the president is, I've said this often here in the country, because anyone who tries to understand President Trump as a typical politician is going to be completely confused. He's not. President Trump is someone who is results oriented. And that means that he's always focused on not the how, not repeating it over and over again, but he's instead focused on getting the problem solved. And I'll give you a couple of illustrations just to kind of show you the point. If anyone had told you that President Trump, by calling the president of North Korea Little Rocket Man, would actually produce a relationship stable enough to reduce the level of tension on the North Korean peninsula, no one would have believed you.
No, I don't think you find that in any political encyclopedia.
That's right. And so it's very similar to what President Reagan did when he went to the Berlin Wall. And he said to President Gorbachev, tear down this wall. Well, everyone on the planet, all of the traditional politicians thought he had taken us to the brink of World War III. What instead had happened was he had brought us to a moment where the Berlin Wall could fall, the Soviet Union would fall apart, and the world would be a safer place. And so if you think of President Trump in those terms, which is he's going to do the most unusual, unpredictable, unanticipated things. But at the end, he'll be judged, and he wants to be judged on the results. We want to be judged on, did the job get done? Did the economy come back? Were we able to find in record time, cures and vaccines for COVID-19? Was he himself willing to put himself on the line as part of that effort? So that rather than, be one of the Monday morning quarterbackers, and I know that's a U.S. term, one of these second guessers who always looks back and says, with the benefit of hindsight, what should have been done. He's one of those people who actually moves forward and gets things done. And I think that's what made him difficult to understand in Europe. It's what made a lot of folks throughout the world very nervous. But now into the third year, as they see that, in fact, if there's anyone who can bring the world economy back, it's Donald Trump. If there's anyone that will push through and get an accelerated cure or vaccine, it'll be Donald Trump. But with that also carries with it, you have to be prepared for, he is going to tell you what he thinks. And so rather than polished, pretty talk, to say what you want to hear, he's going to tell you, exactly what he thinks and what his opinion is. Doesn't mean that he never changes his mind. Doesn't mean that he's always 100% going to be, the one thing you wanted to hear. But at the end of his 4 years, I suspect the test that he'll want to face is, did he deliver? And history is a cruel judge in that regard, because history does tell us, with the benefit of the passage of time, what did happen, not what could have happened.
And it depends who's written the history as well, of course.
That's right. Although you can't write the history in any way that the Nazis won World War II. You can't write history in any way to suggest that even now with, unemployment at numbers that neither you nor I would have ever believed, that the U.S. stock market would be at 24,000. These are things that are objectively measured, and as a result, objective measurements make history more reliable than the characterizations of what those numbers mean.
President Trump does deeply rely on his ability to be a strong businessman, and the economy, as you mentioned, the American economy at the moment, and the unemployment rates are not great as a consequence of coronavirus. Undoubtedly, coronavirus will affect the election campaign. How do you think President Trump will alter his route towards the election campaign during this crisis, which he also has to handle along with the economy?
Well, obviously, as an ambassador, one of the prohibited areas that I really can't get into is the political arena. So the most I can say here is that my expectation is that when November comes around, the question will be, who do the American people best believe can bring both the American economy and the world economy back? And they'll have to make that decision. I can't comment on which way I would make that decision, but that's the decision that they'll have to make. And it's no different here. In Luxembourg, when the next elections roll around, Luxembourgers will have to ask the same kinds of questions. And I'll say that you can really only be impressed by how well, Luxembourg as a government, from the top all the way down through municipalities, have worked and have, gotten masks distributed to individual Luxembourgers to make sure that if masks make a difference, then it's going to make a difference for the better for Luxembourgers. to social distancing. You know, not all of Europe has had a great deal of success on this. But because Luxembourg kind of quietly goes about and gets its business done, it doesn't get as noticed as much as it should. But I think when those history books get written and they start comparing and talking about the kinds of things that have gotten done in this crisis, I think you know, the governments here are going to fare very well.
Well, it also depends on the population we're dealing with and how well spaced we already are. We're blessed in Luxembourg with a relatively small population and lots of green space. So we have been lucky compared to some cityscapes, I think.
Yeah, density of population is certainly, you know, a factor. But as we know from Europe itself, the density of population is not the only factor. There are some areas where density of population nonetheless has a very high contagion rate for COVID-19, has a very high hospitalization rate, has a very high death rate. But it, you know, it does take the ability to manage all of those resources. And what makes it especially difficult is in a democracy and where there's freedom. It's quite easy in a fascist model or a dictatorial model to tell everybody what they must do. They must stay home. They can't do anything. Tell them what to eat, what to drink, when to do it, etc. But we live in a democracy, and so it's where doctors don't make all of the rules. So, is there any doubt in your mind or in my mind that cigarette smoking, you know, leads to higher incidence of death? No. Do we ban cigarette smoking? Because if the government was ruled by scientists, that would be a yes. So we as free societies balance, and the balance is how much risk are we willing to take for you know, against how much enjoyment or freedom that we want to get out of it. And so, you know, being from the south of the U.S., I love fried food. It's not overly the best of the world for you, but I'm free to do it. Now, is that a Weimaraner?
Yes, it is. Yes.
We had two Weimaraners.
Sorry, she was just at my feet and I was worried she'd bark. So
Oh, she's beautiful. We had two Weimaraners. Their names were Reagan and Thatcher. And we love those dogs. They were fantastic. Our son trained our Reagan to play golf with him. So he would drive the ball. Reagan would run and literally catch the golf ball in flight, bring it back, and then they'd do it again. And they would do that for hours on end.
wow. Well, I think I need your son over here when he can fly over to help train my Weimaraner to do something more than jump up onto my lap. Well, she's only 3 months old, so.
Well, well, the fun comes though when they get about a year. That's when they really start to be. It's a great dog for, you know. But you know, I mean,
we digress. But I'm very happy. I'm very happy your Weimaraners were called Reagan and Thatcher. That's a beautiful, beautiful little thing. I wanted to ask you actually, because, you know, when one reads your bio, you are known as a Republican activist. And I suppose most people here in Europe would be aware that the ambassadors, as you rightly said before, you don't have a view, you have to be very impartial. How have you managed to transition? I know you have a lawyer background as well, so how have you managed to transition to hold that impartial tone here?
well, it's just a different job, really, in fairness. I've been very fortunate in that I've developed, you know, I personally feel as though I have great relationships, you know, with the members, all of the members of government. I have many of my best friends are mayors throughout the country and throughout Europe. And I find that if you focus on what your job is and what you need to get done, rather than, you know, trying to do something that's not your job, you get a lot more done. And we have had just a phenomenal success rate here. The things that we're doing, and the beauty of Luxembourg is that not do we just share this bond that arose out of the U.S. liberating Luxembourg 3 times, once in World War I and twice in World War II, but we also share the same passions like for space. Space is near and dear to our heart. Freedom is as important to a Luxembourger as just about anything else. The same is true for someone who lives in the U.S. And so, in that regard, it's been very, very easy. I know that there are going to be things that we don't agree on, and we don't spend a lot of time on those. And then there are going to be things that we do agree on, and we've been very successful, both in helping Luxembourg and in helping the U.S. because our approach to those issues is much more aligned than the approach of Luxembourg with other countries. And so we've taken advantage of that shared value set and shared appreciation of the particular issues. And one of them is that, hopefully, before too long, you and I'll be able to do this interview on the moon.
Oh, wow. Yes, yeah, that would be great. If the Americans are putting up any kind of rocket in the next, let's say, 10 years or so, yes, can I Bunksy my ticket first?
Absolutely. I am surprised at how many Luxembourgers have actually purchased already their ticket to go to space. And many
How
of them
many? How many have?
It's a lot. It's a more. I'm not going to reveal any confidences or secrets, but there are a number of Luxembourgers who have already, whether it's on SpaceX or whether it's on one of the others, have already said, "Hey, sign me up." And so, yeah, I think the U.S. and Luxembourgers are going to be we're going to be among the first that are going to be skipping around on the surface of the moon.
Well, it's no easy feat. One has to be quite fit and healthy to be able to do that.
Yeah, and Buzz Aldrin told great stories about what it was like, and that's something that I don't think the country will ever forget, or I will ever forget. Is literally right behind me here to have Buzz sit with Deputy Prime Minister Schneider and with other government leaders and other business leaders from around the country and talk about what was it like to walk on the moon. What did it feel like? And it was just truly awesome.
Now, I just want to bring up a couple of things, not entirely related to space, but perhaps,
sure.
Again, it's in your bio, but I couldn't find the details, right, whether it was in a book or a seminar. You've either written about or you've been involved in seminars on, it says, topics ranging from professional ethics to climate change. I wanted to talk about climate change, actually, and your views on climate change. I don't know what your views are. I know that, your background is with the Republican Party. I am aware of the American line on it as a government. It's a sensitive issue. Things are perhaps changing. During the COVID-19 epidemic, we've actually seen some wonderful changes in pollution levels of cities, etc. But anyway, I just wondered, what are your thoughts?
Okay. Well, first of all, I co-authored a book on climate change, and it apparently did pretty well. I think we sold out the complete edition of the book, and I'm not going to say anything that's earth-shattering, which is I completely agree the climate is changing. It has been changing for 4.5 billion years. It changes for a variety of reasons. Everything from plate tectonics, which is the continents getting closer or further apart, to the moon's orbit getting further away from the planet, to the Earth's inner core cooling. So we know that there are these mega forces that are all impacting how the climate is changing. We know that there are places on Earth that were once Greenland that are now deserts, and we know that there are deserts that that were once Greenland, and Greenland vice versa. And so we know all of this is happening. And the operative question is, to what degree can we as a species on the planet actually control, mitigate, or change the overall change of the climate on planet Earth? And how, what are the best tools for doing that? Now, one of the things that often happens is that folks who are not well versed in climate change conflate pollution with climate change. Now, there are many good reasons why we need to control the emissions of fossil fuels. There are many good reasons why we need to control many other contaminants that get released into the atmosphere. And so to say that climate change is one of those, I probably would take issue with, because I think that there are good reasons, there are critically important reasons why we should control the release of the pollutants completely independently of whether or not it does or does not cause climate change. Clearly, every activity has some impact on climate change because the climate is changing. And so I'm one of those who talks about mitigation, which is, we know that eventually the climate will change, as it has changed for 4.5 billion. How can we predict that change, and how can we mitigate any potentially catastrophic circumstances that are created by it? So rather than spend as much time, energy, and resources debating that which we know, which is that the climate is changing, how is it that we prepare for the change that's coming? And I think that is where eventually the debate will finally come to rest. The debate will finally end up about how is it that we address the fact that the climate is changing. And I remember as we sat right back here in this room with Buzz Aldrin, Deputy Prime Minister Snyder told a kind of a humorous story, and he said he was talking with someone from Belgium, and they were talking about the fact that Luxembourg is landlocked, and so it has no navy, and yet we have this enormous, we being Luxembourg in the U.S., have these enormous programs for monitoring maritime fishing. And the Belgium person said, but you have no waterfront. And Deputy Prime Minister Snyder says, not yet, just give climate change a little longer and we're going to have beachfront property. So I'm not sure if that's going to happen in our lifetime, but it is something to think about, that we do have to plan for climate change, and we have to do it in a way that is designed for mitigation. Mm-hmm. And it's the same kind of thing that we've had to do with COVID-19. The moment COVID-19 stopped being a containment issue and became a mitigation issue, all of the strategies had to change. The moment we knew or discovered that in fact we could no longer contain to a single small group of infected individuals, the important part was to be able to detect, to make sure we had adequate hospital resources, and to be able to trace so that we could, on the back end, say we're gonna have protect everyone else by having the resources, the cures, the treatments, because we know we can't contain it anymore. Mm-hmm. Now, if we get a vaccine, as you know, the vaccine will help us contain it again.
Yes.
But until then, we have to focus on mitigation.
I just wanted to just go back to the climate change. Obviously, the
Sure.
world has been changing at different rates, much slower rates for a long, long time. For multiple reasons. I think the issue is that it's the rate of change recently seems to be linked to carbon dioxide, which is not in itself a pollutant. It's neutral. It's a neutral gas, but there's quite a lot of it in the atmosphere, and it can't be soaked up quick enough. So it's the greenhouse gas issue. Now, you're a man of the South. You're a man of the oil regions of the US. What do you feel about changing from fossil fuels to different energy sources, and what should they be?
Well, I think a diversification on the energy that you get is always a good thing. Diversification of the food you eat is a good thing. I'm in favor of diversification in every area. But if I said to you that temporal global warming would postpone the next ice age by 10,000 years, how would you then react? Would you say, we'll deal with the next ice age when the next ice age comes? Those are huge topic areas. Mm-hmm. What we have to focus on are the immediate issues of mitigation of how they affect us today. But what happens is when you're talking on those huge issues,
oh dear,
what gets lost is, what do we do about this season and next season as hurricanes become more intense, as weather patterns become more dense, as accretion, which is the process by which more land is created or exposed, where the water, the ocean floors rise. How do we address those issues? Because those issues are the product of something that happened 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. Now, if you ignore that, then you're going to be ill prepared for what comes next. And so, to me, climate change, and I've attended the COP meetings. I was there in Copenhagen. I've been to the various meetings, as you know, co-authored a book on it, have written many articles on it, and the bottom line is that my biggest concern is the oversimplification of the issue, where it's all or nothing, it's one or the other, without considering the possibility and devoting the resources to say, we're in fact going to deal with this on a mitigation basis so that we can adapt to what has already happened, creating consequences that we have to live today. And we're going to take steps today so that other people don't have to deal with them 20 years from now.
Mm-hmm. During our lifetime.
Right.
And yes, I just wanted to also talk about two sensitive issues, perhaps.
Sure.
You've lived in Europe. I think this is your first time living in Europe.
That's correct. Well, depends on how you define living. I mean, if you come over for an extended stay, it's the first time I've had a home here. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So I would say perhaps one of the greatest differences between life in Europe and life in the US is that in general in Europe, we have very strong state healthcare, and also we're not allowed to carry guns. Right. And I just wondered if your experience of living in Europe over these last couple of years has altered what I imagine might be your views on that. Of course, it's linked to taxes as well when it comes to healthcare, the shootings in schools and massacres like that. Living in Europe, we find it very difficult to understand how this can happen.
Well, I'll take them one at a time. I'll start with firearms first, and then I'll go back to healthcare. If you're a country like ours, the force, the thing that you fear most is the government, the concentration of the government. Remember, we were born out of a revolution. We were born out
Many countries were born out of a revolution.
No, I'm going to give you a great example of two countries side by side that were born differently but reached very similar destinations. And that would be Canada and the US. So the US was born out of revolution in 1776. Canada was born out of evolution. It eventually worked its way through and then eventually left, but with the throne's approval, Great Britain, and it's its own free country. Those are very different cultural bases upon which the two countries evolved over time. Now, for us, the fear in the US, the fear is always, and has continued to be fearful of an overly powerful government. And so everything in our government is designed to be very inefficient because we don't want any one person, whether it's Mussolini or whether it's Hitler or whether it's, you go down the list, we don't ever want any one person to accumulate too much governmental power. And the way to avoid that is that every individual citizen is able to protect themselves and to defend themselves, and that they themselves are the unit. So if you thought about it in a kind of a different kind of way, which is in the US, the beginning point is that there is a creator that created people, that gave them rights, and those people then collectively got together and agreed to give those rights, loan those rights to the government. In other areas of the world, there are those who believe the government is the ultimate source of power, and it gives those rights to the people. So the question is, do people give rights to government, or does the government give rights to people? Now, it's interesting that we would have this conversation. It's a great conversation to have, because just a few years ago, whenever the EU was at its strength, and it was a very consensus-based organization, where the idea was we never have to worry about revolution because we reach our decisions through consensus. Now, a day doesn't go by that I don't read about a fear that nationalistic powers, nationalistic people are taking control of countries, and those present real fundamental threats to the individual rights of the citizens of those countries. Now, most times when that happens, a government who wants to take the rights of individual citizens, the first right they take away is the right to own a gun, the right to own a firearm. Because they know an armed citizenry, whether it's Switzerland or whether it's the United States, can protect itself from a government which has decided to go too far. And so I think that is the fundamental difference. And so I kind of chuckle because when we sit in the dining room that you see at the far end down there with ministers from the EU or ministers from Luxembourg, and we're talking about this very topic. It's a great question. It's really a great question. And they start talking to me about governments that they worry about, where there's a concentration of power into a single person who threatens democracy, threatens the individual rights of citizens. And my response is, well, how then are the citizens to protect themselves? There are no good. And it's just a very different, very different focal point. And so if you're sitting over in the US and you look over to Europe and you're saying that is a continent that has had its fair share of Napoleon, of Hitler, go down the list of powers that have the Ottoman. I mean, you could go down the list of the concentrations of power where eventually it was left to individuals to throw off tyranny on their own and self-formed militias to protect themselves. So I think that's the fundamental difference. Now,
one would hope that in democracies, the government is voted in by the people, given whatever plethora of options are available to vote in at the time. And rather than it being a power base, it should be a representation of the people for the people. That's the hope.
That's exactly right. And our belief, our hope is that we are a country where the ballot governs over the bullet, but which also believes that the bullet is necessary to secure the sanctity of the ballot.
But the problem is, if we look across the last, let's say, 5-10 years,
right,
in the US, there have been very, very traumatic, desperately tragic incidents, and it hasn't been against senators, it's been against citizens mostly, and very young ones in schools often. And you know, when you read the scientific research, almost any one of us, let's say we were all carrying a firearm, has the capacity to be driven to a state of madness where we can use it in a state of mental instability. We are all capable of that. And also, one might believe that it's the perhaps job of the government to protect its people.
Right. But and they're all horrible tragedies, but none would compare to the tragedies of World War I or World War II or any of the wars that occurred in the 1800s or any of the wars that occurred before them, all of which depended upon the concentration of power into a tyranny where the citizens were left without a way to protect themselves. And so what we want to do is to achieve a point where we're so secure in the ability of democracy and the ballot to protect us that we don't need more than that. I think even the fears that we hear now of potential hotspots, whether it's in Europe or whether it's in Asia or whether it's on the African continent or whether it's somewhere else, where despotic leaders can accumulate power, leaving citizens with no way to protect themselves. Until we hear no more of that, then we have to say to ourselves, you know, we have to have a way in order for citizens to protect themselves. And I think that's just and the reason I use the Canadian-US example is it is the reflection of how that gets ingrained over generations. So if you have over time reached that point where you are confident enough that there is no real risk of tyranny or oppression or despotic rule, then there may someday come a point where that's, you know, you don't need the firearm to do it. But what we know from reading, I was reading the papers this morning, and to read about this leader in this country and what steps they're taking against their own citizens, you know, leads me back to the conclusion that I don't think we're quite ready yet. I don't think we're quite ready where we can rely just on the goodwill of the ballot box to protect us all the way. Now in healthcare, it really is the issue of the you know, the extent to which capitalism as a motivating factor drives excellence, drives speed, drives perfection. And in a world where technology is moving so rapidly, whether it's in a medical lab or whether or not it's on an iPhone, there's nothing that's going to move us faster and quicker than the profit motives and the benefits associated with a capitalistic structure. On the flip side, what we know is, for models that don't include that, the care as a routine matter is not substantially different. But at the very top and at the very bottom, there are big differences. And so it is why whenever we see a famous celebrity or a royal or, someone from the, from the Middle East who has a lot of wealth, at the end of the day, when it gets really serious, they go to the U.S. And you have to say why. Why is that? If managed social care matched toe to toe, motivated healthcare, why would that be the case?
Well,
And so
they're paying, obviously, they're paying for the best healthcare they can find, which can be found if you can pay for it in the US, because there is great science there, there is great technology, medical care there, if you can afford it.
But why is it the best?
Well, there's excellent research facilities, there's excellent science centers there.
And why are they all there?
They're not all there.
Well, but not all of them. You know what I mean. Why are they mostly there?
Mostly. Well, they're dotted around the world, but there are lots of good...
No, you're right. But a lot of them are in the U.S. And the reason they're in the U.S. is why.
I think you're going to tell me it's capitalism.
Well, I think it is the ability to, if you're willing to work harder and do more and study more and do whatever else, you can get rewarded for that. And so it really is a fundamental kind of difference there, which is, it's the difference between the guarantee of outcome versus the guarantee of opportunity. Mm-hmm. So in the US, someone like me, who grew up very, very poor, didn't even have indoor plumbing in my home until I was 8, could become counsel to the Speaker of the Congress, work in the White House, and now be a U.S. ambassador. Not because I was of where I was born or who I was born to or any of those other factors, but because if you're willing to work hard and do the extra effort and do all those things, there are no limits to what you can accomplish. Whereas a guarantee of result would say, we don't require you to work hard. We don't require you to do more. We don't require you to do any of those things. We're going to guarantee everybody the same result. And so when I was growing up, my grandmother would always tell me this: there may be people who outsmart you. There may be people who look better than you do. There may be people who have more wealth than you have, who have better connections. But there's only one person in the world that will dictate whether they outwork you, and that's you. And so it brings us all the way back to what we were talking about before, which is where is the center of the universe? And in the American model, we're very citizen-centric country. We believe that every person should have the ability to dictate their own way of life by how hard they work, by how much they study, by how far they go, by what all the things they do.
This is an excellent, God bless your wonderful grandmother. I'm going to keep note of that and mention it to my daughter, whose motivation is slightly, well, after I've lost track of how many weeks of homeschooling. I don't blame her, actually. It's slightly lacking. But and thank you for sharing that background. It's very humbling to hear that, and you must feel very proud of everything that you have achieved in your lifetime too.
Well, I'm very proud to, first of all, that you and I got to spend time together at a great, wonderful Thanksgiving event and got to know each other. I absolutely, if you can't tell it, love Luxembourg. I love the people here. I love what it stands for. I love, everything that it's doing. I firmly believe that we are making our way through this COVID-19, and that we can not only see the light at the end of the tunnel, but we can start to feel the heat. We can feel the warmth that comes knowing that you've been in a cold, dark place, but the light and the warmth is just around the corner. And I so can't wait till we're all together again, out in a park, spending time together, laughing and playing and having fun.
Ambassador Evans, thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure. Please send our best regards to your wonderful wife, Linda. And when your son is next over, he can walk my Weimaraner.
Okay. Thank you so much. I look forward to seeing you again. Take care.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.